Well, thank you so much for making all these technical arrangements that enabled me to be there. I wish I was there. And I have to thank most especially Amin Jaffer and Julie Henry and the team for making it possible. So without any more delay, I'll go ahead. When Calouste Gulbenkian arrived in Lisbon in 1942, few would have guessed that this businessman of Armenian origin, an oil industry pioneer and collector, presumably on his way to the United States, so it seemed like this was, for some people, this was his idea, although he never expressed it, would once more be the protagonist of a story as manifold as his own personality. In the late 1940s and early 1950s, three significant moments would become indelibly associated with the complex project that would bind his art collection to philanthropy in forward-looking fashion. Firstly, the partial transfer of his major Egyptian art and painting collections from London to Washington, Egyptian in 1948 and the painting in 1950. Secondly, the donation of a diverse body of works to the Museum of Art Antigua, National Museum of Ancient Art in Lisbon, in 1949 and 42. These were the main gifts that Gulbenkian gave to one entity at any time in his life. And thirdly, and certainly most significantly, the drafting of his will in 1953, which created the Calouste Gulbenkian Foundation, a Portuguese institution based in Lisbon with charitable, artistic, education, and scientific aims. These three moments formed part of a succession of events that we now know would ultimately lead to the establishment of the Calouste Gulbenkian Museum, where the collector's dream of finally bringing together under one roof all the objects he had amassed during his lifetime would finally come true. However, Calouste Gulbenkian's failure to define specific criteria for implementing this project, as well as his hesitation in deciding where and how everything should take place, gave rise to much indecision. Calouste Gulbenkian died without seeing his dream come to fruition, allowing the foundation he created to interpret and subsequently implement his wishes. Calouste Gulbenkian lived the last 13 years of his life in Lisbon, having arrived in April 1942, when the war had not yet turned in favor of the Allies. In November 1942, the Russian counteroffensive in Stalingrad was confirmed, a moment that for many marked the beginning of the collapse of the Nazi power. The status of technical enemy that had been applied to him by the British Authority, British Trading with the Enemy Department, who froze his 5% stake in the oil business, would be compounded by Iran's neutrality at the beginning of the conflict. Only in 1942 did Iran side with the Allies. Gulbenkian, who had served at the Iranian delegation in Paris for more than 20 years, had obtained diplomatic protection, but the situation had become complicated in France under Nazi rule. He arrived in a country whose neutrality had been established by Salazar, who wished to avert the threat that any Portuguese involvement in the war could pose to the country's overseas possessions. The bright and sad paradise described by Saint-Exupéry was sought out by many expatriates awaiting the chance to travel to the United States, where they hoped to find peace, freedom, and protection for their families and property that old Europe now denied them. Lisbon's geographical location and Portugal's neutrality certainly played a major role in Gulbenkian's choice, motivated by his son's new bar, which was made in preference to Switzerland, a destination he had also considered. If the intention was to subsequently settle in the United States, where he had a large number of interests in the continent, not specifically in the United States, but in America, especially in Venezuela, and many contacts. The simple fact is that this never materialized. The Lisbon years correspond to the later stage of Gulbenkian's life. He was 73-year-old and boasted a lifetime of experiences and achievements in both the business and art worlds, operating in the two with equal mastery. He continued to be an avid collector. From his apartment at the Hôtel, he would continue to make important acquisitions until the end of his life. The safety of the pieces left in the mansion on the Avenue Diana in occupied Paris, many of which had been taken into cold storage safe, was a constant concern, as was the fate of his collection scattered around the residence, the National Gallery in London, and the British Museum. One pre-war wish was to construct a building next to the National Gallery to house the collection, according to a design by the American architect William Adams Delano. You can see it here on the photographs on these slides. The plot is quite in evidence here, just next to the big building of the National Gallery. You can see the plot of land, and on the other side you can see the plans by Delano. Calouste Gulbenkian writes to Kenneth Glass in 1943 about the arrangements, and the letter really clarifies his intentions in 1943 and reveals the degree of complicity he shared with Sir Kenneth Glass, the then director of the National Gallery, about the future project and the fate of the collection. Gulbenkian, nevertheless, lamented the fact that the London Gallery's rules forbade the inclusion of pieces other than paintings. When in 1947, Sir Kenneth Clark's successor, Sir Philip Handy, director of the National Gallery from 46 to 67, raised too many issues about the Gulbenkian collection having its own rooms, with the idea of constructing a new building having been dismissed, the collector made his disappointment known in his letter to Handy. Gulbenkian cannot resist asking for advice about paintings from the Philip Lemon collection in New York. So he was disappointed, but at the same time, he was asking Andy to help him to know more about this collection. About Philip Lemon's collection. He was the co-founder of the Lemon Brothers Investment Bank. We all know about them, who died in March of that year. That might come on the market at that period. Gulbenkian's interests included works by Crivelli, Rembrandt, El Greco, and Goya. The Goya specifically was this one, Condenso of Altamira and a daughter, Maria Agustina, donated by Philip's son, Robert Lemon, to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York in '69. So most of these works that Gulbenkian was chasing for, some of them were not available for sale, as we can actually confirm by the fact that they would be given to institutions later on in history. So this was part of 2006 of 600 words on condition that they would be exhibited as a unit. So this would be achieved in '75. It's interesting because this is the kind of thing that Gulbenkian was looking for, that museums would house his collection, make it available to the public, and the fact that this was possible later on, it means that Gulbenkian's intentions were kind of in premonition of times to come. He was looking for works of other artists like Bellini, Memling, Petros Christus. Regarding the Goya works, it was well known that since at least 1939, he had been interested in the concerts of Chinton, now in the Prado Museum. Although he had not succeeded in acquiring this or any word by the Spanish master, in this letter to Kenneth Clark, dated 1939, he refers that he had this conversation with Andre Weil, which he knew very well, and George Wildenstein, who actually is someone who is always involved in Gulbenkian's collection and a bit of his life as well, because it was through George Wildenstein that he purchased the Hôtel Particulier at 51 Avenue d'Iéna. So you can see this is something that Gulbenkian was very much into. Although the question of price was always an argument, and sometimes he would lose for not being a bit more easy with the funds that he would put available for these acquisitions. But coming back to the collection and to the problems that were being raised at the time, a definite solution for the collection needed to be found. But when Lee Ashton, director of Victorian and Albert Museum, proposed providing land opposite the Kensington Museum, it's more or less where now is the Aga Khan Foundation, for the construction of a building to house the Gulbenkian collection. The collector was not enthusiastic, as you can see here in his reply to Lee Ashton. He thought it would be an impossible scheme, because the political climate after the war was not really to build museums, perhaps rebuild museums that had been damaged during the war, but especially the focus was put on housing. From Lisbon, Gulbenkian would continue to seek information from international art markets about the best pieces to acquire, while keeping his usual advisors and suppliers abreast of the works that interested him. Despite all constraints imposed by the war, the art market remained alive and competitive. This quote here is from the introduction to the catalogue European Paintings from the Gulbenkian collection, signed by John Walker. He was then chief curator of the National Gallery of Art in Washington, where he mentions the difficulties experienced by private collectors between 1925 and 1950 due to the competition from public or semi-public institutions collecting in the 20th century, and especially in the last 25 years, he says, has not been easy. In 1943, Gulbenkian bought several pieces from Baron Henri de Rothschild, who lived in Estoril near Lisbon. They are exceptional works: 3 paintings, a pastel, a jasper vase with gold mounting, which is currently in Paris at the Thani Hôtel La Marine exhibition. You can see them here. Maurice Quentin-Latour, it's an enormous pastel and a most exquisite work. The 2 L'Épiciers and the Natier, also exceptional pieces. These pieces were added to the other pieces already in the National Gallery London on long-term loan since 1936. The paintings remained in the custody of the museum until they could be exhibited, which would not occur until 1947. So you can see here the hanging of 1936 and the hanging of 1947. It's quite interesting. You can see here in one of the below photograph, the completely different composition that was that was organized at 47, which already had the hands of the new director of the National Gallery. The paintings remain in the custody of the museum, as I was saying, until they could be exhibited, which occurred in 47 after restoration work of the wings affected by the bombing. And at Gulbenkian requests, having expressed his concern about the safety of the pieces, Kenneth Clark made assurance that the Jasper vase, the one that is now at Hôtel La Marine, would receive special care. Although it was not a painting, and Gulbenkian also had at the National Galleries Chinese vases and other objects which were not paintings, but these we had to understand that were arrangements made with Kenneth Clark and not with Philip Hendy. These objects, so the Gulbenkian objects were taken to safety, just like the other National Gallery's objects, to Fesich in North Wales. In the same year, Edouard Manet's painting Boy Blowing Bubbles was acquired in New York. Prior to the purchase, Gulbenkian also wrote to Kenneth Clark about the progress of the negotiation. Here in this letter of 1st July 1943, he tells Gulbenkian about the fact that the price has been reduced, which is something that Gulbenkian would be very keen to obtain. So in this letter, he tells. Yeah, I'm sorry, I think I've gone a bit too far. It should be understood that at this period, when Gulbenkian was still considering assembling the works in London, with the unconditional support of Sir Kenneth Clark, director of the National Gallery, he was therefore still a buyer. In 43, made clear that he was prepared to provide funds to acquire works in which the British state had shown interests, works by Leonardo da Vinci, Joshua Reynolds from the collection of George Spencer. Here he actually refers to the future of the C.S. Gulbenkian Foundation, which he would like to be put on the labels of his own works on loan at the National Gallery once new steps would be taken. It is unsurprising, therefore, that Gulbenkian extended the scope of his acquisitions to pieces that, that, as far as his personal taste was concerned, were not his first choice. We have an example here of a suggestion made by Clark. He suggested to Clark regarding the painting by Gauguin collected by the owner of his own Manet, Adolf Lewison. This painting, Gulbenkian had seen certainly in the Paris exhibition Chef d'oeuvre de l'art français, which happened at the Palais National des Arts in 1937. The painting would only be exhibited again in Europe in 1949 to mark the centenary of Gauguin's birth at l'Orangerie. And judging by the reproduction, although I'm not a great amateur of Gauguin, this picture is really an outstanding work, says Gulbenkian to Kenneth Clark. He actually had the catalogue, and it's still here in his personal library. In view of the figures involved, eventually, Gulbenkian refused the purchase. So the proposed sale would be $125,000, and Clark made a suggestion that he should buy it for $60,000, so half price. The prices of 19th century paintings were highly inflated, especially when compared with works by old masters. A comprehensive list of potential acquisitions between 1942 and 55, relying solely on the archives, would be too long and inevitably incomplete, as countless unrecorded opportunities doubtlessly arose. The examples here help to illustrate some of Gulbenkian's collection options in the 1940s until the moment when he abandoned the London project and began a new chapter with the transfer of the collections to Washington in 48 and 50. However, we must emphasize that although the collection was apparently complete by mid-1940s, the collector would still go on make major acquisitions. The eclectic spirit that always characterized him is reflected in, among other work, Chinese porcelain, French 18th century furniture, silverware, and painting. During these years, we can find a trend towards editions that derived from Gulbenkian's particular interest in numismatics and the art of the book, the genesis which goes back to his first acquisitions in the late 19th century. Thus, in 1946, he acquired part of the famous Jameson collection of Greek coins, from which, his advisor, Stanley Robinson, writes that he took the most beautiful pieces. You can see one of the examples here, and actually the quadriga gave rise to the symbolic logo of the Calouste Gulbenkian Foundation with the four aims of charity, education, art, and science. The statement by Robinson, confirms the excellence of the specimens. This was the only part of the collection, of the Gulbenkian collection, that was in Lisbon upon Gulbenkian's death, having been deposited in a bank. I mean, the numismatic collection with the Jameson purchases. In 1949, when he returned to Paris for the first time since arriving in Lisbon, he acquired 11 Roman gold medallions, the 3rd century AD, from a set of 20 found in Abu Shir in Egypt in 1902. The Gulbenkian specimens come from the collections of James Loeb, 3, and the Pierpont Morgan Library in New York, 8, from which you're seeing the effigy of Alexander the Great. In a letter to Stanley Robinson, he writes that this new acquisition will certainly enhance the importance of our catalog, which he was preparing with Stanley Robinson, because Gulbenkian was always very much interested in fixing out the latest knowledge on different chapters of his collections by not only providing studies, but like he did with the Egyptian collections, where he financed the British Museum to publish the catalog with the translation of the hieroglyphs. Or in the case of these numismatic collection, he would want Stanley Robinson to do a very scholarly work, which he did. As far as the art books is concerned, he acquired through Anne Stiebel in New York and Paris in 1948 a set of 7 18th century books with precious bindings from the Corton Bishop collection. This was also a major purchase. The work from Œuvres de Molière with Les Fourberies de Scapin, it's at the moment also in Paris. 2 years later, Gulbenkian informed Alexis Léger, also known as St. John Peirce, also known as Douglas, in his correspondence with Calouste Gulbenkian between 46 and 54. He was a diplomat and a Nobel Prize winner in 1960 for literature, and then living a kind of exile in Washington. And he would write to Gulbenkian about what he saw and give suggestions, and Gulbenkian would write back. About the Lucius Wilmerding collection sale scheduled for March of the following year, these books were displayed at Park Bennett Gallery in New York, and Gulbenkian wished to know Léger's opinion on the quality of the works. In December, the writer responded favorably to Gulbenkian having examined the Wilmerding library during a brief stay in New York, and he confirmed that his choices were justified. He just writes, "Vos acquisitions de la vente Wilmerding sont royales." And effectively, there were. From 1948 onwards, a new phase in the collection's destiny began, as had happened in 1936, in a paradigm shift. Once the plan conceived by Senator Clark was floundered, everything now pointed to the United States, not as a personal destination, at least this is never directly expressed in Gulbenkian's correspondence or writings, but as a new home for his works. In 1949, the Egyptian, I'm sorry, the British Museum, which housed the Egyptian collection, had to let it go. And so the new venue would be the National Gallery in Washington, and where they would be exhibited for an indefinite period. In the same year, Gulbenkian informed Alexis Léger of his intention to transfer more pieces from London to Paris, which would occur the following year. In October 1950, the exhibition European Painting from the Gulbenkian collection opened to the public. You can see here some moments of the departure of the works from London to New York, and then the works from New York were transferred into buses to travel to Washington. The presentation of the pieces at the National Gallery in Washington, which was a state-of-the-art building, were very much well accepted by Gulbenkian. This included works not only of paintings, but enameled glass from the 14th century, pieces of furniture by Charles de Crossin, the Abu treasure, and 16th century tomb rock from part of this generous long-term loan. During the Washington years, Gulbenkian turned to his friend Alexis Léger, St. John Press, as his observer, receiving details about the pieces, condition, and safety. The writer is reassured always to Gulbenkian that he would provide the most detailed information about the museum, its professionals, and the excellent condition in which the works were exhibited. While Gulbenkian concerns about the fate of his collections continue to grow, the idea of establishing an institution with philanthropic aims gained traction. The collector was not unaware of the need to establish a trust or a foundation to manage and allocate his fortune, thereby avoiding his works of art becoming dispersed after his death. Over many years, Gulbenkian shared all his fears as well as his desires with Kenneth Clark, director of the National Gallery, Lord Crawford, chairman of the Board of Trustees of the National Gallery of Art, London, Alexis Léger, epistolary confidant, John Walker and David Finlay, curator and director of the National Gallery in Washington, Lord Radcliffe, his advisor and confidant, and his lawyer, Charles Wishaw, L.G. Denton, A.P. Jacobian, and José Diezaret Perdigão. Many of these men became his friends, and he discussed plans for his foundation with them. By 1943, the collector appears to have turned the page on the Washington chapter. Once again, his wishes clashed with the resolve of those who favored organizing the works chronologically rather than according to a collector's logic. The idea of constructing an autonomous building was once again floated, but Gulbenkian ultimately rejected it. This is very contundent here in 1953. This is not appealed to me, although I had considered it in the past. In fact, 51 Avenue d'Iéna was built for that purpose. I'm not committing myself one way or the other, whether it be about my works of art or my wider schemes. I think this is very blunt in terms of Gulbenkian. In the same year, he wrote his second will, creating the Calouste Gulbenkian Foundation and opening the way for his collection, like the foundation he had established, to remain in Portugal. The gifts he made to the Museu Nacional de Arte Antiga between 1949 and 1952 arose naturally out of a desire to strengthen his ties with Portugal. However, more than recognition, this was a gesture worthy of reserving reciprocal benevolence from the host country in the form of privileged status, should it become necessary, which eventually did. And this is something which he failed to obtain either from the British authorities or from the American authorities. When the news of Gulbenkian's death in 20th July 1955 reached Washington, it seems not to have taken anyone by surprise. Information about the collected states of health arrived regularly, and everything seemed to be leading towards the inevitable outcome. The close relationship that existed between John Walker and Calouste Gulbenkian is confirmed by a handwritten letter which his daughter Rita Essayan sent to the museum curator describing Gulbenkian's final moments, mentioning that she had written in the knowledge that Walker was one of her father's friends, rare friends, and always welcome. This is a letter sent by Rita to John Walker, 24th July 1955. On the 1st July 1957, a report in Time stated that the Wandering collection would be sent to Portugal within 3 years. The collection, which now belongs to the Calouste Gulbenkian Foundation, created in 1956, would indeed arrive in Portugal in 1960. John Walker, who had taken over as director of the National Gallery of Art the year after Gulbenkian's death, retired in 1969, which is also the year in which the foundation's headquarters and the Calouste Gulbenkian Museum were opened in Lisbon. In the long 23-page speech he delivered on the inauguration day, he told the story of the businessman and art lover who had so captivated him, concluding that Calouste Gulbenkian was a man who had striven all his life to make his every activity a work of art. Often he had succeeded, sometimes he had failed. To have enjoyed his friendship was my only reward, but it was always seemed to me sufficient. A new chapter in the history of the magnificent collection assembled by Calouste Gulbenkian began in '69, with the more than 40 artistic categories amassed by the collector brought his life henceforth preserved in the same roof as he so very much wished. It is a testament to tenacity and sensitivity of erudition and spontaneity, always rooted in a love for art. Thank you very much.